Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon to all participants and welcome to the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies webinar titled Charting an Exit from the Pandemic Through Vaccination. My name is Dira. I am the Events and Partnerships Officer at CIPS and I'll be your host for today. I hope everyone who is attending the webinar both on Zoom and YouTube are staying healthy during this pandemic. To give a brief information about our organization, the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies is an independent, nonprofit, and non-partisan think tank that advocates for practical policy reforms informed by evidence-based policy research and analysis. Our policy perspectives are based on the belief that only civil, political, and economic freedom allows Indonesians to achieve greater prosperity. A month ago, CIPS released its latest policy paper titled Partnering to Push Back the Pandemic, Boosting Capacity to Deliver COVID-19 Vaccinations in Indonesia. This paper discussed how public-private partnerships in COVID-19 vaccinations can support government objectives in achieving herd immunity. You can download the paper to the link provided that I will be sending over on the chat box. Today, we are going to discuss Indonesia's efforts in addressing pandemic through vaccination efforts. Before I hand over discussion to our moderator, I would like to remind you that you can ask questions to our speakers today by using the Q&A feature in Zoom, or if you're watching this webinar on YouTube, you can ask questions through the chat box and our colleague will relay those questions to our moderator. Without further ado, I would like to invite our Head of Research, Felipa Amanta, to lead the discussion with our speakers today. To Mbak Felipa, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Dira, for that warm introduction. And good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to everyone here in Indonesia, or good evening to those of you joining us from abroad as well. My name is Felipa Amanta, and as the Head of Research, I will also be your moderator for today's discussion. First of all, I would like to thank everyone, especially the audience, for attending today's webinar. I believe today's discussion is very important, especially to address Indonesia's vaccination efforts that are currently ongoing. Through today's discussion, we hope to gain insights and perspectives of Indonesia's effort to vaccinate its population, the challenges that we're currently facing, as well as exploring possible solutions to support a wider but also more sustainable vaccine distribution, not just for this year, but for years to come as well, as we all race towards charting an exit, I guess, through the pandemic, as the title of the webinar suggests. Today, we will also be addressing Indonesia's effort to acquire vaccination supply through its position as COVAX co-chair, and where the private sector can be leveraged to support wider COVID-19 vaccine distribution throughout the country. And here with us today, we already have three expert panelists who will share some insights and perspective from their respective positions about our topic today. We have, first of all, Mr. Andre Suryanta, Associate Researcher at Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, who also happened to be the author of the policy paper that was shared in the chat box earlier, titled Partnering to Push Back the Pandemic, Boosting Capacity to Deliver COVID-19 Vaccinations in Indonesia. We also have Ms. Penny Herasati, Director of Social Culture and International Organization for Developing Countries from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. And last but not least, we have Mr. Ermindon, Chief Field Officer from UNICEF. Hello, everyone, to the panelists. I hope you're all doing well and staying healthy. Thank you so much again for being in this discussion today. So each speaker will be given about 15 minutes to present their views and perspective on the topic. And at the end, we will open the floor to questions and answers from the audience. As Dira has mentioned before, I would like to remind today's participants, you can always ask questions at any point in our discussion through the Q&A chat box in Zoom. Or if you're joining us from YouTube, you can also put your questions in the chat box in YouTube and we'll monitor that, and I'll be asking those questions at the end of our discussion today. Please use the format to whom the question you are addressing, and then your institution, and then your question, so we can see who the question is coming from. We will start first from all three speakers, and then last but not least, proceed with the question and answer later on. So without further ado, let's start our discussion today. And first of all, I would like to invite Mr. Ermin Dun as the representative from UNICEF to open our discussion today. So Pak Ermi, the floor is yours. Pak Ermi, you're still on mute, sorry.
Yep, finally, yeah. I have difficulty to unmute myself. Okay, so
We can hear you now. Thank you.
it is clear my voice.
Yes.
Thank you, Mbak Filipi, and good afternoon, Bu Penny, Mas Andre, and all the panelists, all the participants in this webinar. Actually, I didn't prepare to present my speech in English. I didn't know that it's English, so some of the presentations still in Indonesia. So I try my best. It's okay. We can start my slide now. Okay. Yeah. So the title of this, as I mentioned before, I prepared this presentation. I was thinking that I'm going to speak in Indonesia. So apologize if some of the presentations still in Indonesia. Can we back to the slide, please? No, the first one, the title. So actually, I made this presentation based on the paper that already wrote by Mas Andre, and I got a lot of insight on this paper. So on this paper, on my presentation, actually, I just tried to emphasize some things just to contribute to what Mas Andre already expressed. Basically, the presentation I put is like vaksin for all or vaksin untuk semua. Can we go back one slide, please? Yeah. So this presentation actually based on 3 questions that Mas Andre posed me, and to me it's very hard questions. So I try to like make it respond to this question, but not in particularly to every single question. So it's like kind of like general response to this. Our government plan to vaccinate at least 75% of Indonesian population with total more than 208 million. It's quite a big number. And at the point now on the 3rd of October, the coverage for the vaccination in Indonesia for the first dose is like around 45%, while the second dose about 25%. In the beginning of the pandemic, when we start to have this vaccination program, I wrote an article on the conversation, and I mentioned there are at least 5 aspects that we have to consider if we want to have this program succeed. And it's the supply, distribution, the cold chain, also all the vaccinators, and how we deal with community awareness and readiness, as well as the risk communication. You can go to the second one, please. Yeah, at the moment, as I mentioned that from supply side, in our early speak this afternoon, as me and Bu Penny, we said that COVAX facilities, also UNICEF and also the other agency and government already contribute to the supply of some vaccine. And at the moment, we have in Indonesia, it's not just for COVID, but from total vaccine that already arrived in Indonesia is more than 276 doses, almost 77, 277 doses. So actually, this we are quite confident with the supply at the moment. So hopefully that with the position at 45%, and with this supply, the vaccination can be successful. Can we go for the next? Yeah, I also look at Mas Andre paper, and I think that there are a lot of discussion about who the how do you call it, the target of the vaccination, and the question is like, who will get the vaccination if the supply, we have shortage of supply. However, for the Center for Global for Development say that for the complex emergency health problem like COVID, value for money will mean different things to different people. And always decision making comes down to the opportunity cost and perspective. So this is something that also triggered me to respond to what Mas Andre already wrote. And if we put the cost and benefit of the vaccine, sometimes we put people like who will get the vaccine or who will not get it. But actually, based on this perspective, and also because of my background is public health, so this also triggered me to discuss further about who will get it and why. Can we go back, please? I could go next, please. Okay. So WHO already mentioned, and also our government have the same position that vaccine, especially for COVID-19, is public goods. It have to be non-exclusive, no refundable, and also have to be the benefit have to be everybody. We can go through, please. Next, please. So yes, yeah, okay. We can go back, go through. Next. Yes. So also in the last G20 meeting, our government already put our position clearly that the government support, Indonesian government support that vaccine is a public goods. Everybody have to, every government have to support this, put all the effort to make sure that everybody get the vaccine. And this is also one example why we UNICEF, other agency, and also the government Indonesia see that through one of the facilities, the COVAX facilities, and advanced market commitment, we can secure vaccine to fulfill this mission. Okay, can we go to next? Also from the other perspective, the global economic cost of vaccine say that vaccine nationalization also costs, if we think only ourselves, I mean like the vaccine nationalization could cost the global economic up to 1.2 million. Also is mentioned by our government. And as long as there is no vaccine against the disease, the global cost associated with COVID and the economic impact could be reached 3.4 trillion each year. The poorest country will have the worst impact on that. And also we have to see that for every dollars that we spend for poor country, actually the high income country will get back almost 5 times of it. Okay, we can go through this. Now we look at the vaccine distribution in Indonesia. If we can see from here, there are provinces with very good number coverage, have more supply to other provinces. But in general, like all the vaccine that already distributed to the provinces, 73 of the vaccine has been delivered to the community. Can we go through, please? And at this position, however, if we can see in here, there are some groups, the vulnerable groups that the coverage is still low, especially for the elderly and also the young adult, children from 12 to 17 years old. So those are the other group that I think still under the coverage still low. Can we go through, please? The next, please. We see from here that if we this slide, I just want to explain that actually the distribution of the vaccine reflect on the area where the high incidence of COVID appear. We can see the Jakarta, Bali, Kepulauan Rio, Yogyakarta, and Bangka Belitung are the provinces with very high coverage. But also this also in line with the high infection, the number of infection in those provinces. So the question in here is like whether the priority of the vaccine just because of the high infection or just the other consideration too, especially if we can see that those provinces are actually the provinces with high economic activities, and we have to put kind of like first priority to them to have a high coverage too. Can we go next? At the moment, based on the data, up to my data is like 3 October, but it could be changed now. So 60, almost 65%. Sorry, 62 to percent, 66, sorry, 66% of national coverage actually contributed by province in Java. This is also because of the population, the concentration of population in Java, is more populated compared to other provinces. But also this also reflects the distribution of the vaccine in Java. I think more the supply is like more in Java actually now. Okay. Next, please. Yeah. This slide, I want to show you that despite we have a lot of concentration put on the effort to have a high coverage for COVID vaccination, but the routine one have to get more attention too. You can see from here, but since COVID, the routine COVID, the routine vaccination for children also going down. We can next. So this is the role that the private sector can put. Actually, since vaccination is like public goods, so actually everybody have to get the vaccine. We don't really say that it's like private or public, but the private can also contribute to the research and development, the distribution, also the services, and also for the program vaccination, also we call it like public and private mix. Can we go next, please? Only two more. One more thing that I want to put in here, that the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime also already warned us that actually COVID-19 vaccine and can also have the corruption risks. This is some other aspect that we have to also put attention on this. So our mission to fulfill vaccine for all and vaccine is a public goods. At least this is something that we have to think of. Next. So lastly, I want to say, I just want to make sure that vaccine is for all. Public is public good. Public sector, private sector still can contribute to the acceleration of vaccination, and especially to support the like unreachable group or very difficult to access group population and community. for example, in Eastern Indonesia, and some people that don't have privilege to get the access, and also the risk mitigation on corruption in pandemic, especially in vaccination, the procurement, and all the things that are related to this have to be have more attention on this. I think that's all that I can say, and apologize again because this kind of mix of slide today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ermi. That was a really good starting point for us because you covered a lot of information about the current statistics on vaccination rate in different provinces and some of the challenges that we're currently facing in terms of a more equitable distribution of vaccine. So next, we would like to invite Ibu Penny Herasapi, a representative from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. And as we know, our Minister of Foreign Affairs is currently co-chair of COVAX, which is a global alliance to aim towards a more equitable vaccine distribution, especially for low and middle income countries and developing countries. So Ibu Penny, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Felipa. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, on behalf of Director General for Multilateral Affairs, Pak Ambassador Febrian Rudyard, I would like to thank the organizer, the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, for inviting us. And of course, it's a pleasure for me to be a participant, to be one of the panelists in this afternoon webinar. The title of this webinar, I guess, charting an exit from the pandemic through vaccination. I have given 4 guiding questions that I'm going to which guide my presentation. But before that, let me say hi to Pak Andre. Sorry, Pak Ermi. My fellow panelists, sincere apology that I didn't say hello to you earlier. Now, let me start my presentation with of course, with the first guiding question. Global health issues have become the focus on the international community. All international organizations focus on handling COVID-19 according to their respective expertise. When WHO announced that the COVID-19 is a pandemic, global pandemic, then everyone is adjusting their position, their role, and what they can contribute to, to help us, everyone, to end the pandemic. Of course, apart from the WHO, which is the main global health cooperation organization, other international agencies are also dealing with the COVID-19 since the beginning of the pandemic. But let me go back, giving you an example, organization that is adjusting itself to the pandemic situation. For example, ICAO. In this regard, ICAO is set up or kind of release regulation, which allows observing the health protocol. And International Maritime Organization, for example, with the disruption of the supply chain, IMO is making sure that global value chains, run smoothly, something like that. So everyone is adjusting its position and its role to contribute again to of course, at that time last year, it was too early to say to end the pandemic, but at least to help to mitigate the pandemic, COVID-19. Now, since the beginning of the pandemic, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Indonesian representatives abroad have played an active role in ensuring the availability of access to, I would say, when I say in the beginning of pandemic, of course, not to vaccine, because at that time we didn't have the vaccine yet. So at that time, we were trying to help the government to get at that time the therapeutic, the medicine for this, all the symptoms of the COVID-19. And at that time also, for example, the personal protection APD. So at that time, it was very difficult for us to get masks, right? So it was difficult for us to get gloves. So it's apparently when we hit by the pandemic, our national capability, to provide those equipment was limited. So at that time, Indonesian representative, of course, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, were trying very hard to get assistance from neighboring countries to get a mask and all equipment needed. Now, similar to vaccine, now that we have vaccine, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and also the Indonesian representative abroad, we are trying very hard to very active to get an access to vaccine to meet domestic needs to mitigate COVID-19. Now, in this health diplomacy, and particularly on the issue of vaccine, Indonesia's principle on global health issues and foreign policy in the pandemic era are, first, to make sure that fair and equitable access to safe, quality, affordable, and effective vaccine for all, and to make sure that vaccine as a global public goods. Pak Ermi has mentioned this principle. And number two is we are trying to, after learning that apparently our national health resilience and independence is kind of shaking when we hit by the pandemic. So we are trying to help the country to build national independence in the field of medicine, medical devices, and vaccine. Now, the availability and affordability of COVID-19 vaccine for everyone are seen as one of the keys to overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic in the long term. Meanwhile, national independence will contribute to national resilience in the face of other pandemic risk in the future. One lesson learned that we get from the pandemic is apparently when it comes to the medicine, even we don't have the bahan baku obat to make that medicine. So apparently we imported some important part of it. Now, Indonesia's effort in this context is in the vaccine diplomacy at multilateral and bilateral levels. So we're trying to get vaccine through the bilateral and multilateral levels. This policy is supported by President Regulation on number 14/2021, which is concerning amendment to President Regulation 99/2020, concerning the procurement of vaccine and implementation of vaccine in the context of combating COVID-19 pandemic. Article 21 of this President Regulation states that to support the acceleration and smooth implementation of the procurement of COVID-19 vaccine and COVID-19 vaccination, ministries, agencies, provincial government, and district governments, cities provide support under the provision of this regulation. In this context, of course, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs provide the following support in coordination with the Ministry of Health. facilitating international diplomacy to gain access to COVID-19 vaccine and budgetary support for multilateral cooperation, as well as other necessary support. Now, at the bilateral level, Indonesia is exploring other vaccine cooperation to secure the need for national vaccine supplies. We have bilateral cooperation with AstraZeneca, Novavax, Sputnik, Pfizer, Anhui, Zhifei, and CanSino. So that's in the bilateral cooperation. We have, in the bilateral level, we have cooperation with some manufacturers that I've mentioned. We managed to buy the vaccine from this manufacturer. And also at the multilateral level, our effort include cooperation within the many international organizations, including WHO, ASEAN, Non-Aligned Movement, G20, OIC, and in the Foreign Policy Global Health. And also we are a member of the CIPS. We are the, what is the CIPS? Consortium of Epidemic Preparedness, something like that. Arif can help me on that. We are a member of the CIPS Investor Council, and also we are a member of COVAX AMC. And as mentioned by Felipa, Ibu Menlu is one of the co-chair of the AMCEG. This effort is to make sure that we will get sufficient supply of vaccine for Indonesian people. As of the 3rd of October, we have secured a total of 276,628,570 doses of vaccine, both within the framework of bilateral and multilateral cooperation. I just would like to mention that through multilateral cooperation, we have received 39,286,480 doses vaccine for free. So this is within the COVAX facility cooperation that COVAX has set a target to send vaccine to the participant countries up to 20% of its population for free. Now, as co-chair of COVAX MCEG, what is COVAX and what is Indonesia's role in there? COVAX facility is an umbrella mechanism for the procurement and financing of the future vaccine of COVID-19. This coalition is coordinated by partners who are members of the vaccine pillar. In the focus area is the access to COVID-19 tools accelerator, namely WHO, Gavi, and CEPI. Of course, in the ACT accelerator, there are 4 focus areas. For pillar. Number 1 is diagnostic pillar. Number 2 is therapeutic pillar. Number 3 is vaccine pillar. Number 4 is health system pillar. Now, in the beginning, of course, these 4 pillars have received equal kind of attention, but now attention is given more to the pillar number 3, which is a vaccine, because we believe that vaccine is a game changer. But we should be mindful that other 3 pillars are equally important: diagnostic, therapeutic, and health system pillar. Now, the objective of the COVAX facility are to bring together supply and demand. So COVAX facility is a pooling of funds and resources, especially in condition where COVID-19 vaccine are limited.
And, so sorry, Bu, you have about 4 minutes.
Yes, all right. Thank you. Now, COVAX facility are offering also to procure COVID-19 vaccine evenly. So people, countries who are not member of the COVAX MCEG, they can buy the vaccine from COVAX facility. Now, what is Indonesia's role? Indonesia, Ibu Retno is one of the co-chair of COVAX facility engagement group. together with the Minister of Health of Ethiopia and Minister of International Development of Canada. The duties of MCEG co-chairs are to plan, lead, and facilitate the implementation of MG any decision during the meeting of MCEG, to facilitate and summarize discussion, ensuring MCEG can contribute and participate in a meeting related to the COVAX vaccine discussion, and of course, working closely with the Secretariat and provide input agenda and other issues that has become a concern of the three co-chair. Now, how can Indonesia secure a sustainable supply of vaccine going forward? We have, as I mentioned earlier, that we try to build independence of the national health capacity. Now, we are trying to find a partner for vaccine research and development. So that's number one effort. And number two is we are trying to for scale up production for vaccine. We also apply for the supply chain and manufacturing. We are applying to be a hub for the manufacturing production, which WHO has formed a supply chain and manufacturing task force. The intention is to establish a hub for technology transfer and training center. So Indonesia is trying to be one of the hub in the Asia region. Now, last guiding question, how has the private sector been involved in the supply of vaccine? Have there been talks to attract companies to manufacture Indonesians to help with the supply issues? Yes. Indonesia's government is currently reviewing the possibility of developing a vaccine hub in the region, as I mentioned, through strengthening the capacity of Indonesian health industry, including the holding of Indonesian pharmaceutical state-owned enterprises. Now, Ministry of Health has identified 6 national pharmaceutical industry that have capacity manufacturing vaccine capacity. So we are trying to find a partner for this 6 national pharmaceutical industry that could be helping the government to scale up the production of the vaccine. Well, I guess that's all to end my presentation, I guess. Yep, and I'm ready for discussion, question and answer in the Q&A session. Thank you, Felipe. Sorry for taking too long.
No, but perfect timing, actually. Thank you so
you.
much for that very insightful presentation. I think we learned a lot about Indonesia's effort to ensure a steady supply of vaccine for Indonesians through both bilateral and multilateral efforts, as well as what we're looking towards in the future in terms of our own manufacturing capacity to produce a sustainable supply of vaccine. And I think to wrap up our discussion today, last but not least, we would also like to hear from Mas Andres Hurianta, who is an associate researcher at CIPS, who also happened to be the writer for the paper on partnering to push back the pandemic, boosting capacity to deliver COVID-19 vaccinations in Indonesia. So he has been studying this whole vaccination effort and how private sector can also play a role. So to Mas Andre, the next 15 minutes is yours.
Thank you, Pipa, and thank you again to Penny and Pak Ermi. Very, very interesting presentation and actually flows quite well with my findings also. So that's very nice when you have this kind of like things coming together nicely. So I shared my screen and I hope everybody is seeing it okay in a full screen format.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So as Pipa said, I'll be presenting some highlights actually about on our policy paper about COVID-19 vaccinations in Indonesia. And why I say highlights is because the policy space here is very, very dynamic. There's a lot of changes, rapid changes of policies because of the situation, understandably. And so I try to include some more updates of what's the latest that's been going on since we actually finished the paper. So hopefully this becomes a complement to the paper and it's interesting to the audience, right? So for those of you who are probably not very familiar with the pandemic story in Indonesia, if I have to choose a sentence as a title, this is what I will choose: when complacency meets Delta. And that's the story of our pandemic so far. 2020 was relatively a good year. I know there's no good year in a pandemic, but it is a relatively good one for us because we have increasing number of cases, but nothing to the extent of big exponential jumps or big waves in some other countries. Unfortunately, this had created some complacency where people don't really adhere to strict mobility restriction, and we don't really have a high test and tracing ratio throughout 2020. And a lot of people actually believe that when vaccine comes in 2021, the pandemic will be over immediately. So that sort of complacency, sort of like, we know that it's not true, unfortunately. And that created actually 2 waves of pandemic in Indonesia. The first one was right when the vaccination actually starts in January. So we're actually in our first wave when we begin our vaccination, right? And unfortunately, we didn't really learn. So after the year-end holiday situation become a new a wave, we repeat the same mistake during the Eid holiday season, and millions of people basically ignored. The government put a travel ban, but millions of people just ignored that. And unfortunately, at that time, Delta has already taken hold in Indonesia. And so we see the case numbers just start skyrocketing and things get pretty bad, but at least we learn a good lesson that, we need to accelerate our vaccination, and we also need to impose some kind of mobility restriction and need to increase our testing and tracing. So now our testing and tracing is actually really good, right? Pak Ermi already mentioned this, that we have a really big target, and it's even bigger if you see from a dose perspective, because each person likely will have to receive 2 doses. So we have to deliver 400 million doses by the end of this year. This is what the president asked. I want this to be finished by the end of 2021. Unfortunately, if we see the reality here, the orange bars are the number of vaccines delivered every day or administered every day. We have never really been able to achieve the target that we set out to do, right? For a long time, we want to do 1 million doses a day, and we actually cannot reach that until sometime in the mid to end of August. And by right in August, we're supposed to be doing 2 million doses a day already, right? So we are, our vaccination speed is keep chasing the target instead of meeting the target, unfortunately. And the big hurdles here, there are 2 big hurdles that I've identified in the paper, is that we are very dependent on international supply, which is very limited. And we also have a problem in terms of distributing the vaccines domestically. So we are dependent on international supply because we do not have a local COVID-19 vaccine yet, as already mentioned by previous presenters, right? And we've basically bear the brunt when some producing countries, which also need these vaccines, they want to keep it for themselves. For example, India, right? When they are facing the big second wave, they say, we're not exporting all vaccines, we want to use it for ourselves. So it affects our AstraZeneca delivery, right? So our speed basically depending on this international supply. And this is important because, as you can see, whatever doses that we want to do, whatever target we want to achieve, is basically a function of how much we can import, right? And this is just to show the amount of import that we're getting every month. So that's on the left-hand side, the blue bars. And obviously then you can only reach 1 million doses a day in August because you're receiving 31 million in July. That's assuming everything is used up in the next month. Right? And so if we see this, and it becomes clear that whatever you want to do, the speed, then you need the stock, right? You need the supply to be available. And I think at the moment, government is already trying to push up all the deliveries. So we're seeing more faster speed, but again, we're still a bit difficult in reaching 2 million or even above 2 million speed. Now, the other side of the problem is that, in terms of distributing in an archipelagic island, it's not easy, right? And unfortunately, our healthcare sector has suffered from underinvestment for a long time. We have a lot of deficit in the infrastructure, in the pharmaceutical industry itself, capacity, and the human resources. And what this does is it created a lot of different capability in absorbing the vaccines that's been distributed by the central government. And this is actually just to illustrate how uneven distribution can be. And this is just a very simple calculation I did. And I won't go through the detailed calculation, but I just want to highlight the colored cells there. So between the fast provinces, there are some provinces that probably can finish in less than a year. But the slow provinces, right, can take up to a year after the fast one finish. So there's this huge timing gap between provinces on which one finished first and which one finished last. It could be 11 to 15 months gap, right? And why is this a problem, you may wonder? Well, let's go back to the concept of herd immunity, and that is basically natural immunity plus the vaccine-induced immunity, right? So natural immunity is what you get if you get infected and recovered, right? Now we know that recent research has shown that these immunities does not last forever, right? The natural immunity only start decreasing after 6 to 9 months, while the vaccine-induced immunity start decreasing after 3 months. So there's this sweet spot, and now that's why you're hearing that countries wanting to give booster shots after 6 months. This is actually the reason, because they detect that, okay, it may start when the sweet spot is like 6 months. And as you remember just now, the gap is 11 to 15 months, become the fastest and the slowest, right? So this is what might happen then. If you remember, Jakarta, let's say Jakarta can finish fast, while Lampung maybe finish in like 19 months. So Jakarta reach its herd immunity in 8 months or 9 months. But Lampung is still ongoing because they need 19 months. So by the time Lampung is still building up, Jakarta already start losing its herd immunity. And at the end of the day, we have a problem because we cannot have an overlap of national level herd immunity, right? And unfortunately, I think we cannot really try to match the speed. So I don't think we can ask the fast province to slow down. Yeah, I think that's politically not possible. And to force the slow one to go fast, yes, that's ideal. But if it's an infrastructure problem, then it takes time to address that. Right? So if we have to be stuck with this situation, I think what we need to change is our paradigm about vaccination. And that is, vaccination is no longer something we need to do just fast, but one time and stop. But it's actually like a leaking bucket that is, like you have to fill it up as fast as possible.
I think Mas Andre is losing his connection. Mas Andre, are you still with us? Apologize to the audience that we're having some technical difficulties, I think, with the internet connection problem here.
I can hear you, Felipa.
Yes, thank you so much, Pupeni. I think Mas Andre's connection just dropped out.
Okay, can
Are
you
you
hear
back?
me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Hear you.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
But we
Yeah.
can't see you for some reason.
Well,
Oh, there you
it's
go.
okay.
There
Yeah,
you
it's
are.
okay.
Hello.
Yeah, so I'll just continue then, right? So
Yes, please.
yeah, so when the government is talking about the vaccination process in Indonesia, there's 2 tracks that's allowed. I think Pak Amel already also mentioned that. First is, of course, the government's program on the left-hand side here. And the second is the private track, which is called Vaksinasi Gotong Royong, or VCR, right? I mean, the source of funding is definitely different. The brands of the vaccine use also must be different. The healthcare facilities doing it also must be different. And the recipients are in a way different, because for the private track, it's the corporation that registers the participant. While for the government program, anybody can just register themselves. Now, the only 2 things that's probably similar is that for both tracks, recipients doesn't have to pay for the vaccine, and the vaccine are all brought in by a single state-owned enterprise. At the moment, this is Bio Farma, right? So both government and private track, all the vaccine must be coming in through Bio Farma. When we review the current private track, unfortunately, they are facing quite a lot of issues. This is initiated by Kadin, which is the Indonesian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, and it was launched about 5 months ago. But so far, the uptake is still less than 2 million doses. If you remember, our target is 400 million doses. So 2 million doses is quite low, right? And Fortunately, they started quite slow because they opened registration early in February, but the price was not set until 3 months later. And by the time it was set, the price or allowed to be running, it was only 2 weeks before the government free program is open for all population, right? So a very short head start. And again, as I already mentioned, sourcing and distribution is handled by BioPharma, which also handles the government program. And a lot of businesses were, not very happy about the price. And at the initial stage, registration was complicated and delivery schedule was also unknown. And if we see that most of the companies registering for the program are actually in Jakarta, we already know that Jakarta is one of the fastest. So this probably helped Jakarta finish their program faster, but nationally it's a little bit unclear on the effectiveness. There were some attempts because of the low uptake, so they want to sell the remaining stocks to individuals so people can buy directly. But this was canceled because a lot of public outcry. And so Kadin is now trying to use up the vaccine as a donation for the traveling vaccination costs, and they want to put this in 34 provinces. Well, the vaccination gotong royong is probably the most famous. You will probably hear most in the media is about vaccination gotong royong. There are actually other private sector in participation in vaccination that is, for me, is actually quite meaningful, even more meaningful, to be honest. For example, this vaccine refrigerator donation that addresses the cold chain issue. And as I think Ibu Penny also mentioned, there are some joint venture or local with local companies that wants to build factories.
Hello, Mas Andre.
We lost him.
Yeah, I think we lost him again. But while we wait for Mas Andre to join us, I also wanted to remind the audience here that after we finish with the presentation from Mas Andre, we will head to question and answer. So I would invite everyone, if you have questions, you can drop them in the question and answer box or in the chat box in YouTube. Oh, and Mas Andre is back. Mas Andre,
okay.
You have about 3 minutes left to.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Just to highlight the bottom one, that's very exciting for me is this donation of solar powered health centers by a German and Swiss company. So this is actually because you can use it in rural areas because it doesn't need electricity. It runs the equipment by using solar cells. And so we give some recommendation in the paper, and I try to match it with the current development, right? The first recommendation we give was giving a booster vaccination for healthcare workers because they were the first one vaccinated, so they might be the first one to lose their protection. But in our recommendation, we recommend that the hospitals actually source it directly, buy it directly for their own cash flow. We see now that's happening, but it's still under the government program. And government try to use the vaccines that's donated so it doesn't take up the quota of the general public. You also talk about investment in vaccine manufacturing, and as I said, this is coming up. There's some factories being considered, but especially for the booster vaccine, that's the whole idea. But unfortunately, it might ask for some local content, which is a bit concerned if I show you later, right? Two more recommendation was about using private innovation for rural vaccine distribution, like the solar powered health center, which is not yet implemented, I think. And Bali, I think there have been a lot of talks about Bali reopening, and we just heard very recently now, Bali is going to reopen in mid-October, and we believe that this will be safer if we open to tourists that has received at least one dose of vaccine, right? And there's some other homeworks, I think, that's now really on the next stage after the program is finished. So with paid booster policy, hospitals are now getting requests. People want to buy booster vaccines now, right? And we know that it's not available, but the demand is there. So when to allow this, right? Will the government program finish on time? If they say we want to wait until the program finish, so will it finish on time? Does the fast province then have to wait for the slow province? This all needs to be worked out soon, right? And if we use really local vaccines, right? We emphasize on local vaccine. We need to be sure that this is accepted internationally because we had this problem before. Some countries saying, no, we don't accept this brand, that brand. And if we use Indonesian brand, we have to make sure that this is accepted by these countries. And lastly, of course, it's not just vaccine. It's also other pharmaceutical supply chain, because now we're seeing there's COVID pill coming online soon, right? This is the latest development now. You might have a pill instead of vaccine, and the producer has licensed Indian manufacturers, but why not us? That's my question actually. So I will end my presentation there. Hopefully I don't go over time too much, and look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Mas Andre, for sharing your insights and the highlights of the paper, as well as very timely developments that have been happening, especially with the recent opening of Bali as well. So thank you so much again to Ibu Penny, Pak Ermi, and also Mas Andre for your insightful presentations earlier. And we will now open the floor for question and answer. So I would invite all audience joining us in Zoom as well as YouTube. You can drop in your question. If you're on Zoom, you can post it in the Q&A box, or you can also post it in the chat box in YouTube, and we'll post that to the panelists as well. But while we wait for the audience to post questions, I also have some questions on my own. I think both Mr. Ermi and also Mr. Andre highlighted the fact that there is quite a stark difference between vaccination rates and also the speed of vaccination in Java and also in other provinces. Even within Java, there might be some stark differences between different provinces as well. So I would like to ask Pas Andre first, and then we can go to Pak Ermi. How do you think we can ensure a more equitable distribution in this space? Mas Andre?
Yeah, thank you, Pipa, for the question. I mean, definitely this is a complex issue, right? Distribution, because it doesn't just involve the central government, but it also involves the regional government, right? This vaccine, even though the procurement is done by the central government, then it's passed on to the Dinkes, the local Dinas Kesehatan, and they're the one who's supposed to absorb this, right? So then the central government just wait for, if this is finished, then more requests. So I guess that's why a general, broader sort of like healthcare reform is what the Ministry of Health is thinking at the moment, right? Just boosting capacity everywhere. That's just no question, but it has to be done. Yes, we have also a lot of puskesmas, which is the community health centers, but not all of them are also equipped with the proper cold chain for this. And even the capacity of the cold chain, sometimes the one that has cold chain, if you're doing COVID-19, which has a lot of doses at one time, then you don't have space for the other vaccines. So cold chain is basically one of the things that our government is pushing. I think the Ministry of Health is using this opportunity to try to build up the cold chain network in up to the at least the capital of each province, right? So doing a hub and spoke model, right? So all the vaccines go there, and then but I think we can extend it, as the paper says, that there are technologies available for more even remote areas distribution. And I think we should look seriously at that. These are small scale healthcare infrastructure. So it's not the big toll roads. So it's easily installed, distributed everywhere. It's just a matter of whether you want to do it or not. The technology is there. So that will be my response. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Pak Ermi, what's your sense on what can be done in terms of a more equitable distribution?
Thanks, Pak Felipe. Actually, from field experience, it's not just about the distribution. Most of the time, we rely on the good data and reporting system. You know that at the moment we have in practice, the government have the smile, they call it like smile, we can say smile or smiley, is how the government put all the logistic and all the kind of like recording and reporting on logistic. So based on that, then they can redistribute, or they reallocate or top up the vaccine supply to all the district and provinces. The problem with that is like some of the time they delay in distributing the vaccine to province or district because of the system. They don't really have a correct reporting and recording. So probably on the system says the supply is safe. They have enough stock in the district or provinces. In fact, in some, based on our experience on the field, sometimes on like in Puskesmas or this district, they don't have any supplies for vaccine the people. So these some things also that we have to consider to look at to have a better reporting and recording system. A part of the the facilities that Mas Andre already mentioned. So because the data is the key now to make the supply, the flow of supply going smoothly on the field. That's some things that I can contribute.
Thank you so much, Pak Ermi and Mas Andre, for that answer. We also already have several questions coming from the audience. This one is from Richard Borsuk. The number of new cases has dropped very sharply in recent weeks. Is that because of volume of testing has increased sharply in the same time? Because for a long time, Indonesia was doing very little testing. So the question is how our testing levels currently compare with other countries. I wonder if perhaps Mas Andre or Pak Ermi have that data on that, or
yeah, I can start. I don't have the exact number, but definitely our testing number has increased, and the indication is that our positivity rate, which used to be in the 30%, right? Because if you test more, then your positivity rate should go down, right? Like the number of people positive from the total number of tests. So it used to be 30%. Now we are below 5%, which is what the WHO actually wants. And indeed, in the initial stage, actually, again, this is a problem of central regional government. Some regional governments actually consciously wants to limit their tests because they were evaluated based on the number of new daily cases. So if you don't test, you don't find the daily cases, right? Then the Minister of Health, sort of like, I'm really, my hats off to our Minister of Health. He changed the rule of the game. He said, now he want your PPKM or whatever to be lower the level. We want to see testing numbers. We want to see positivity rate. That's one of the criteria. And that changes the game, right? Because now you're trying to lower your positivity rate by doing a lot of tests. So yeah, as I said, there's a lot of adjustments. Policy cannot just be static in this situation. And fortunately, so far, we're learning the good things. And I hope that it stays there.
Thank you so much, Mas Andre, for the answer. We have a question for Ibu Penny. In terms of, I think Mas Andre earlier mentioned that the next level, the next stage of vaccine diplomacy right now is also getting international recognition for the vaccines that we do use. So I wonder to Ibu Penny, how is the process currently of getting the vaccines that we are using, such as Sinovac, recognized for international travel, especially for Indonesia, like for Haji? Maybe Penny, if you can share the progress on that.
Thank you. Yeah, the issue of vaccine recognition is one of the issues that has become the top priority for the Minister of Foreign Affairs when she met with her counterpart during the, many occasions, but recently, of course, during the United Nations General Assembly. And in particular, Ibu Retno met with the Foreign Minister of the Saudi Arabia, and she raised the concern of this vaccine recognition. And Ibu Retno asked everyone, and in particular, for the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Saudi Arabia, of course, this is for the Hajj. We have the interest of, our pilgrimage, people who's going to Mecca, but at the same time, in the international community, Ibu Retno asked for us not to politicize the issue of this vaccine recognition. In the beginning of the issuance of emergency use listing, we learned that Sinovac has received the emergency use authorization from WHO only recently. So this is, we always, remind everyone that not to politicize the issue of vaccine. And luckily, eventually, Sinovac get emergency use listing from WHO. So so that's the effort by the by Indonesia, of course, to make sure that we don't politicize the issue of vaccine, and we can read this trend during the, as I mentioned, during the issuance of emergency use listing for Sinovac.
Thank you so much, Bu
Over
Penny.
to you. Yes, thank you, Felipe.
Thank you. We have another question, this time from Elizabeth Pisani. We have seen huge increases in refusal of vaccines in recent years, including in Aceh, Riau, South Sulawesi. And I think this is something that we often see, the hesitancy to get vaccine in the community level. And I think Elizabeth said this is also at least part of the reason for the difference in the speed of vaccination that we earlier talked about. So what is Indonesia doing to address this vaccine hesitancy from the community? Maybe I'll go to Pak Ermi first.
Thank you. I think the point that Elizabeth Pisani just brought up is kind of like a big homework for us. And UNICEF also, in collaboration with the Minister of Health, we try to address this issue. And we already realized and aware about this issue from long time, not just now as like in COVID situation, but also in the past in routine immunization, during the measles and rubella campaign. Also, we do face the same problem, and we try our best to approach those people. It's not a simple task, because it's also related to their belief, their culture, their knowledge, everything. It's like it's kind of a complex issue, but we already aware of it. And now we, in collaboration with Minister of Health also, we use many channels like social media, local leaders, influencer, everybody that in the ground that can approach the people to get vaccination or want to get vaccine. I think we try our best to tackle this issue. But yeah, this we realize that this is a big issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Ermi. Maybe Bu Penny, if you have any addition on government efforts to address this hesitancy.
Thank you. Well, this is I believe this is not under the responsibility of my ministry, but in the WHO, is it WHO? No, it's in the COVAX facility. When during the meeting of MCG, we always have a session on the issue of how to deal with community that refuse to have the vaccination. But yeah, they use the psychologists and other perhaps more to the community development approach and psychologists to approach those community. But basically, they have the kind of set of campaign materials to be shared with participants countries if they face those kind of a situation. But if we would like to compare with the other countries, it's kind of tricky in a sense that, for example, in the United States, you cannot force, everyone to have this vaccination. So, for example, my niece, for example, she doesn't want to have this vaccination. So she just said, no, that's it. So, yeah, well, of course, again, as I said, during the AMCEG meeting, they have a program, they have materials to be shared with other members, participants, and we can use this. And I think this is more to the portfolio of the Ministry of Health. We haven't discussed at length in the, as far as I know, we don't discuss this at length in the WHO, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, Arif. But in the COVAX facility, we do. They share some materials on to handle with this issue.
Thank you so much, Bhupeni, for the explanation as well. We have several questions again that I wanted to pose to the panelists, and I also wanted to invite the audience. We still have time, so if you want to put your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box or in chat box in Zoom, feel free to do so. And this question, I think, goes to Mas Andre and Pak Ermi. I think we realized through this discussion that current vaccination effort is not a race just for this one-time vaccination, but a long-term continuous vaccination effort. But at the same time, Pak Ermi also raised an important point about the risks associated, especially corruption risks associated with such kind of efforts in the long term. So I wanted to ask both of you, what kind of policies do you think should be in place to ensure that long-term vaccination delivery happens in a sustainable way, but also that will mitigate any corruption or rent-seeking avenues in the vaccination effort as well? Maybe I want to start with Mas Andre and then go to Pak Ermi. Go ahead, Mas Andre.
Yeah, thank you, Pipa. And indeed, this is like one of the biggest concern actually, right? Once you start having booster vaccination and the private sector gets involved, of course, there's always risk of fraud. There's always risk of corruption. I think Indonesia actually was rocked by, fake vaccine scandal, before, and even now. I mean, I've heard rumors of this black market for booster vaccine, and who knows what kind of vaccine they're selling there, right? I mean, it could be just saline water, So it's a big risk. I think BPOM and Ministry of Health itself, ever since the vaccine scandal happened, has beefed up their monitoring overview. But I think what's important is try to balance out between sort of monitoring and trying to really control everything, and incentivizing the market to actually bring the right product. And that's why actually one of my recommendations is actually to allow the hospitals to start buying these vaccines for their staff. Because I think the incentive for them to keep their staff healthy is bigger than trying to get a cheap vaccine, right? And with that, then they can form the supply chain. They have a reliable relationship with the supplier and these hospitals. Because this is actually also done in other countries, in Thailand, in India. It's the hospitals that gets to, import the vaccine, right? And they know how to check it. They know how to quality control. And this will be likely, of course, and hospitals have reputational risk also if suddenly they get involved in fake vaccine, right? So hospitals should really be the key for me here, instead of we're looking at the sort of like the really importers, we really should empower the hospitals a bit more in this case. At least that's my answer. I have a little bit of comments on the previous question, if I may.
Sure.
From Ibu Elizabeth, right? I mean, I think our government, interestingly, I mean, a lot of the hesitancy is also religious-based. So they are now approaching all the religious leaders, trying to get the religious leaders to speak about vaccination. And in terms of mandate, we only have vaccine mandate in Jakarta, but that's also even not enforced, to be honest. But it might be coming from the private sector, because we see in Australia, in US, in UK, now they're saying jabs for jobs. If you want to work with us, you better get vaccinated. So that might actually is the private sector initiative that actually push people into getting vaccinated at the end. So that's just my addition a little bit there. Sorry.
No, thank you so much, Mas Andre. Pak Ermi, do you have thoughts on the kinds of policies to make sure that we mitigate the corruption risks of vaccination effort?
Thank you. I think on my slide, I already put some of the recommendation from the UN. Let me check again. UN office and on drug and crime, and there are a lot of like kind of like mitigation effort that Indonesia and also other countries have to put in place. But on top of that, I think accountability, transparency, and how to give room for civil society and also journalists to be kind of a community watch, whistleblower, and to work together during this pandemic. I mean, like this is kind of like humanitarian crime if during the pandemic and you still steal from the poor is something that's not acceptable. So I think that's the key issue. And just to add to what Mas Andre mentioned about the interesting big question from Ibu Penny, that also from UNICEF we have a group to address this. We call it like risk communication and community engagement to deal with that. We will work together closely with Ministry of Health and also with the like the Hawk Booster group, anti-hoax group in Indonesia. I forgot the name of the group, sorry. But yeah, we try to deal with that. But we try to use like we lot of effort to for demand creation for immunization, and yeah, as long as especially during this time. So yeah, this is kind of long effort, but we will see that it works.
Thank you so much, Pak Ermi. Okay, we have time for, I think, one last question. So I think this will be our closing question of the day. Earlier in her presentation, Bu Penny mentioned that in addition to ensuring current supply of vaccines, Indonesia is also looking towards increasing our own production capacity as part of perhaps the likelihood of us being one of the vaccine manufacturing hub. I wanted to get a response as well from Mas Andre and also Pak Ermi about our current capacity. In your own assessment, are we ready? How ready are we in terms of becoming the manufacturing hub? And what kinds of policies do you think should be in place to ensure that we do increase our capacity and have the investments to do so? Maybe let's start with Mas Andre.
Yes, thank you, Pipa. That's actually part of our recommendation in the paper, right? I mean, to boost the capacity. I mean, for the past over 100 years, we only have one company manufacturing vaccine in Indonesia, and we need to ask the question to ourselves, why just one, right? So, but at the moment, of course, it's all, my view is it's market driven. If the market doesn't ask for it, then it's useless to increase capacity. So now because of COVID, we're seeing that at least there's going to be another 3 or 4 companies now thinking about doing a factory in Indonesia. And this is usually a joint venture between Indonesian and so far it's Chinese or South Korean biotech companies. So like Etana Biotech with Walvax, so Indonesian Chinese, J-Bio with UNERO, so that's Indonesian university, and Kalbe Pharma with Genexin, with South Korea, right? Of course, Kalbe Pharma has brought this up though. Like they say, if we want to invest in a factory, we need to be sure that the market is there, right? Because building a factory will take 2-3 years and then upscaling to production, this and that. So we need to make sure that the demand is available for the next 5-6 years, right? So I guess then what's needed in the policy is to make sure that for me, it's not only about Indonesia, that this vaccine, if possible, can be acknowledged overseas, so it can actually be exported also. That helps you to ensure the sustainability of the market, at least from the private sector perspective, right? So, but again, and I'm sorry to throw this complication, but COVID is not always about vaccine also. Like the molnupiravir that I mentioned, the COVID-19 pill. When it was announced that they finished the trial, phase 3 trial, the stocks of the vaccine manufacturer drops, right? Because then that might have an effect on the demand of vaccine. Right? So how do we make sure we have all these bases covered, not just vaccine, but also the other COVID-19 treatments? I think that we need really to think towards the future on that. So that'll be my response.
Thank you so much, Mas Andre. Pak Ermi, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm quite optimistic on that. I mean, like Indonesia have a very long experience. Biopharma is one of the oldest vaccine manufacturers in the world. Part of like helping to kind of processing the Sinovac, but also Biopharma have long story in making a lot of vaccine and have a potential even export to more than 100 countries in the world. So we have the capacity. Apart from that, we don't forget that we also have a lot of like research institution, Ekman institution, UNER, UGM, a lot of universities that are not try to look at this opportunity. So COVID, we get a lot of challenge, but also open a lot of opportunity. And we realize that actually we believe that we have confidence and quite optimistic. We will be fine in the future. And one more thing that also Ibu Penny mentioned in the previous presentation, that we are not alone in this war. We work together with other countries and we support each other. So I think I'm quite optimistic on that.
Thank you so much, Pak Ermi. And maybe I'll head to Bu Penny if you have any closing thoughts on this. We were talking about our domestic industry's readiness to be the vaccine manufacturing hub.
Yeah, well, from the pandemic, we learned a lot of things. One of the, I think I would say one of the biggest thing that we realized that our national resilience on the issue of health. Apparently, we didn't realize it until we faced with the pandemic. Now we realize it that even for a small issue, apparently we don't have the capacity to produce, that equipment, medicine, and those kind of medical supplies. So the lesson learned is from now on, I think we have to strengthen our capacity, including through international cooperation. We have to allow us, other actor also to be a player in this area. Pak Ermi mentioned how good biopharma is, but at the same time, we also learned that biopharma is the only one. And biopharma capacity has been, I would say, at the maximum. We cannot, even if we offer biopharma to have a cooperation to scale up, to do scale up production, biopharma is not in the position to accept or to do so, because the capacity has reached its maximum capacity. So again, lesson learned from this pandemic a lot, including we discussed also the capacity of the Puskesmas to do the vaccination. We have set the target of 2 million. Unfortunately, so things like that. A lot of lesson learned that we get from this pandemic, and hopefully we can fix that with cooperation and contribution from all of us. Thank you, Felipa.
Thank you so much, Bu Penny, for that. And that wraps our discussion for today. Thank you so much for the audience for all of the really great questions. And thank you as well to Ibu Penny and Pak Ermi and also Mas Andre for sharing your insights, your answers, and for the very great discussion earlier. Just to quickly summarize, we have been talking about the importance of vaccine as a global public good as well to get us through this pandemic. And it is not a race, but rather a continuous process that we have to maintain in a sustainable manner. But We do have some challenges such as with the supply, with distribution, and also we talked about communities' resistance to getting vaccinated. And all of that challenges mean that currently we haven't been able to reach our vaccination target, and we still are seeing huge discrepancy of vaccination rates between the provinces. And to address this, private sector will play a huge role in supporting the vaccination drive, not just in getting the vaccines and not just delivering the vaccine, but also just contributing technology or cold chain infrastructure or any other innovations that can help us deliver the vaccination. And not just vaccination, but also other alternatives like what Mas Andre was saying about COVID pills or medicines or testing and tracing as well. And also in just in the long-term outlook, we do need to ensure national resilience, and that also involve us improving our own domestic capacity so that we can hopefully be also a vaccine manufacturing hub, not just for Indonesia, but perhaps also exporting vaccines to other countries as well. And last but not least, we also talked about diplomacy, not just to ensure vaccine supply, but also getting our vaccines recognized for international travels as well. So we've covered a lot of grounds today. I want to thank you again to the panelists, Bu Penny, Pak Ermi, and Mas Andre for your time. And thank you so much to the participants for watching today's webinar. I will return today's session to our MC and host of today's webinar, Dira. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mbak Felipa, for leading our discussion today. And I also would like to thank all the panelists, Mas Andre, Ibu Penny, and Pak Ermi for participating in today's webinar. Before we close our webinar today, I would like to share some information with all of you. The first one is you can download our paper titled Partnering to Push Back the Pandemic, Boosting Capacity to Deliver COVID-19 Vaccinations in Indonesia by scanning the QR code on your screen. Or you can download it through the link provided at your screen, and it is for free. So you can download it and also share it to your colleagues. This paper, as I have mentioned before, it is written by Mas Andre, our associate researcher. And also, don't forget to follow our social media accounts so you won't miss any information about our events in the future. CIPS is an independent and non-profit organization. We hope you can support us by donating to our organization using the QR code on the screen. You can scan it using an e-wallet of your choice, GoPay or Wuling Gajah and our others. And you can become our supporter by donating as little as 10,000 rupiah, and you will be part of our membership circle. Your donation would mean so much to us and can help us to create a free and prosperous Indonesia. Thank you, and we hope all participants and panelists today are staying healthy during this pandemic. Goodbye and see you on the next CIPS events. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Penny.
Terima kasih Bu Penny. Terima kasih sekali lagi, Pak Ermi.
Terima kasih banyak, Bu Penny.
Terima kasih, Andre, Pak Ermi, Felipa, dan Dira.
Mari, Bu Penny.
Sehat.
Terima kasih.
Thank you semua.
Ya.
Mas Andre ya, aku nggak lupa kalau ini